that now there is a longer lifespan. Of course, there is other hazards that have actually come along that has actually uh, taken out or attempted to reduce this particular number, but there are still more and more people who then exist and are able to live past the age of 60. So our concern is that this particular increase is actually taking place in a situation where society is actually least prepared for that challenge that comes with the demand to meet the needs of this particular older people. And if you look at the range of the problems that older people in Africa are actually facing, is actually constantly increasing as societies are actually locked up in conflicts. They're experiencing huge economic problems. There are natural disasters, as currently they are in Kenya. We have disease, we have deterioration of family relationship, and all these particular challenges have a particular correlation to how older people are treated. One of the things you will realize, the setup of the family as we have today, and the setup of the family of our parents, those of us who are now above 40. If you look at your parents then and the setup of their family, they were more tolerant to each other. It's not that there is a sudden big change in society, but uh, couples then were more tolerant. There is a way the institution of marriage was something that people looked up to. A divorce was something that was actually frowned about, and it will shake many when somebody says they're divorcing. But then, fast forward, things have really changed. Things have really changed from black to white. The change is actually 360, that it's so easy to get in and out of marriages. By the year 2020, immediately after COVID, there was a statistic that was done based on the number of cases that had been filed in court, and we had more than 10,000 petitions for divorce that had actually been filed in court. What is the impact of that to the older people? Remember, in our olden, if you look at our parents, you can actually look back at some point where your mother or your grandmother came visiting and actually stayed. And when she was sick, there was some kind of family support system away from the village or away from where they operate from to come and be attended to. But now, with the kind of deterioration in family relationship, now you find that particular move is hardly happening. And if it happening, it's from the village straight to the hospital straight back home. So you find that the older people now are not receiving the same kind of comfort and support they would have been receiving if the circumstances were different as they were those days. Then you have that particular negative attitude that society has towards older people, which has also meant that solutions are being sought for all other population group except the older people. There is little or no efforts at all to try and ensure we also create room for the older people. In fact, if anything, we're trying to phase them out. We are trying to phase them out for them to live the same. There is a level of actually mistreatment or neglect and abandonment of the older people. And which is actually growing at an alarming level. And I was actually having that discussion with a day class this morning, and I was giving them an example of Dr. Camino. Today, Dr. Camino would walk into the court and you find lawyers, let me not call them students, who are then admitted. They do not take or pay any attention that Dr. Camino has actually walked in and is in need of a particular seat. He has actually to mention that, young man, can I have a seat? Remember, it may appear to be a normal thing, but that's not how we treated our senior citizen. And that is not even how the legal profession was actually oriented to be. That the front bench was left for seniors, and anytime a senior walks in, they were allowed then to sit. But times are actually changing, and therefore, and this cuts across. So you find there's a level of mistreatment across the board for senior citizen. Now, the contribution that the older people also have made to the development of our country and the sustainers of their nation actually goes unnoticed. Many a times people actually believe that some of these particular development were actually there and they were meant to be there, not knowing that this particular senior citizen, like those who fought for independence, had to undergo great sacrifice for us to be able to enjoy the kind of freedom that we actually enjoy today. But that particular effort is actually going unnoticed. The contribution, and this to me is very important factor. If you walk across many African countries, Uganda in particular, in our communities, I know even within Luo Nyanza, you will find there is a lot of older people who are then taking care of younger children, actually their grandchildren, because their own children died of AIDS. And in that way, you find that there's a lot that is actually expected of these particular older people who have actually done their time. Therefore, they're resting towards their sunset days, but you find them actually doing what their children ought then to be doing. So you find that they are looking after children of those that actually died of HIV and AIDS. And until recently, the situation of older people also was quite simply not on the agenda of many of the children or organizations in Africa. People didn't take a lot of attention to the role these particular older people perform and the kind of attention they actually require for them to be able to then retire out of the earth comfortably. But very slowly, this particular situation is actually changing. Older people are now starting along that path that had been previously taken by other minority groups, and they are finding themselves within that particular definition of minorities, which include people with disability, the women, and as they strive to seek for recognition so that then their rights can then be catered for. So this brings us to the definition of what age discrimination then is. And age discrimination is defined as that systematic and institutionalized denial of the rights of older people on the basis of their age by individual groups, organization, and institution. Remember the Universal Declaration of Human Rights when it pronounces itself that these rights are an entitlement to all human beings, irrespective of age, sex, creed, age, whatever. That particular definition is a definition that is applicable to any person who is deemed to be human. And therefore, it can't be speaking to the younger generation and not speaking to the older generation. There is no time that these rights cease to exist or they are waived provided one is alive. You only waive that right when you commit suicide, then those particular rights then cease to attach, or when you leave this particular earth, then you can't then go with them, because without that plus soul, there's very little you can enjoy about those particular rights. But then again, there are those rights you even carry to the grave. And that's why we're told there's that offense of disturbing the dead. The dead must be allowed to sleep in peace and rest in peace. If you disturb them, then there's an actionable claim to that particular effect. And therefore, some of these rights are tied to us by virtue of us being human. And the fact that you are old does not in any way olden those particular rights or limit the way those rights are supposed to apply to you. So contrary to all these assertions that have been made on this subject, that some of the abuse is actually as a result of ignorance, that we are ignorant about how we want to treat our older people, or thoughtlessness, or prejudice and stereotyping. Actually, the biggest problem we face in Africa is when discrimination is actually perpetrated as a matter of policy by people knowing exactly what they are doing. You will find that we have people sitting in parliament. We will pass legislation, be it touching on the roads, be it touching on construction of houses. But then when you're doing this particular policies or legislation, we then feign an artificial ignorance that these older people then do not exist. They will figure out on their own. And actually, recently somebody actually said that when you're designing a house or you're building a house, try and think of yourself in your olden days. You'll find the design of the house you have will be very different from the house that actually you have actually designed now, or you live in that particular house. You'll find that you try to have your room at the topmost floor so that you are able then to see the ocean or to get clean air, but then you realize that these rooms you are creating for other people to enjoy and not yourself, unless you're deliberate about it to create either some accessibility to that particular house. Otherwise, you will find all those particular rooms will be left unattended because you cannot then utilize them. And therefore, we have to think about the old age, even as we plan today. And older people, and older people's rights as human beings are neither recognized, neither are they valued. As such, you find that older people in Africa suffer abuse, they suffer assault, they are murdered at the hands of those from whom they will expect support and protection. They're accused of all form of witchcraft. And actually, this is alive to us here in Kenya, that they have been accused of witchcraft, and to some extent, they have been torched. They have actually died simply because people can't explain certain things, that there is so many accidents as a result of careless driving. But then you say, no, it can't be a natural thing. There must be somebody who is bringing all this negative phenomenon. We look around and we identify this older generation, and we say they are responsible for the death of these or for the death that results from the accidents. So they are accused of witchcraft, from causing death, from HIV AIDS, which is a result of one thing or the other, traffic accident. Again, when there's too much rainfall as it is right now, we again go back to them and accuse them of killing people using this rain. When it is too little, again, we look at this particular generation. So we always look for people there to blame. And they have been identified in Africa as the punching bag for all calamities that happen. within our environment. And they're denied the opportunities of employment and access to property. In fact, we know of instances where they have been disinherited or even killed for their land, for their own land and property, and are not given adequate legal protection. We know of cases where children have organized for the death of their own parents so that they can inherit, because the parents have actually refused to die and you want to be rich yesterday. And the only way is to inherit, because this old man has refused. So you organize for him then to die. And there is no legal protection protecting these older people. And there are no policy or legal framework that can protect the right of older people in majority of the African countries. And if you look at this discrimination of older people, it has actually happened despite the existence of key United Nations and international declaration, convention, and charters to which African nations have appended their signatures. And there are quite a number of these particular convention, treaties, and declaration, and each of them actually speak to the rights of human beings. Even if they don't touch on the older people, they refer to human beings. So basically, we assume and we are certain that those particular conventions can be interpreted purposefully and in a manner that incorporates the rights of the older people. But despite all this, you still have these atrocities being visited to the older generation. So you have all those particular treaties that actually speak to the right of the older generation. By way of example, if we look at Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948, it actually uses the words, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and right, and they're endowed with reason and a particular conscience, and they should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Part 2 of it actually says everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedom. Article 6 of the Universal Declaration on the Right to Development states very clearly that all human rights and fundamental freedom are indivisible and interdependent. It actually even goes ahead to state that states should take steps to actually eliminate obstacle to development that actually results from failure to observe civil and political rights. So if you look at those two instruments, they all begin with the word all human beings. Everyone is entitled. All human rights and fundamental freedom. So there is no distinction on the enjoyment and the application of this right. And therefore, this now takes us to see how this age discrimination is actually being experienced by the older people. How do they experience this particular discrimination? Unless there's a question or clarification up to there, I will want to look at how the older people experience this discrimination. Now we start. Okay, Daniel Kashem, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. I remember from a previous class that Dr. Jadid explained that there is no such thing as positive discrimination. that the three main elements of discrimination, the three main elements have to be that there has to be a different kind of treatment. There has to be a basis. In this case, it will be age, and there has to be something negative that comes as a result. And I'm thinking, in most of the cases where old people are discriminated against, actually it serves to their benefit. Because if you talk about employment, retirement, when people retire, actually it is as a result of their body not being able to, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, they've worked long enough, and now they need to take a rest.
Mm.
It is arguable that it is actually to their benefit.
Mm.
And I'm struggling to understand how then that would fit within the small corridor that Dr. Jadid gave us.
Okay. Let's hear. I'm seeing some other two participants raising their hands, so I hope they'll provide an answer. Jacqueline.
Yes, just a thought.
Mm.
Am I audible?
Very, very audible.
Okay, when we look at mostly women, some women, most of the women usually fear getting old. Okay, you find that sometimes someone, when they're applying for the ID and the birth certificate, let's say someone was born in 1990, they might say they were born in 1995, so that they can fit in to, let's say, the government and work for the government for longer years. But just as my colleague has said, that you find that when they get old, as much as they lied about their age, now you find that let's say they say now they're assuming they're 55 and they're 60. When you look at this person, the level of productivity has already diminished, but they do not want to accept their age. So that is very common, mostly in some ladies. They are ever 16. Yeah.
They were 16. Thank you. There's another hand. Okay. So let me go back to, okay, there is Patrick. Is it Patrick? Okay, you can unmute and, yeah, Peter Kamau.
Thank you, Wally. This thing of age and discrimination of older people. It's interesting because when you talk to a 20-year-old, they'll think that a 60-year-old is very old, like my previous colleague.
Very true.
Well, I didn't say that you're 20, but I said that, you know, so it actually, you know, and they say that age is a number. If you look at the WHO, the current definition of age, you know, 60 years for men, that's, you know, I think that is young, you know, up to 60 years is defined now as young. And then the window of older people is actually very small. And that again, whether you are old or whether you are retired, is dependent, one, on the geographical area, and two, on what, in most cases, the occupation of the people that you are talking about. So, and the discrimination here and the fight and ignorance of the older people, I think it's more in developing countries where the younger people tend to will want to get to where the older people are, or will want the resources which they do not have. So I'll probably say that this is also the definition is geographical. But let me also say that the area of positive discrimination, when you give a seat, like you were saying to Dr. Amino, because of age, that's positive discrimination. But of course, the negative discrimination is when we ban our old people, you know, or when we kill our older people, so that we then inherit what they have. So if you look at it from all that aspect, there is truth in everything to talk about. But I just wanted to put in. I don't know. I don't want to meet with someone and call me old because I'm not it.
Thank you, thank you, Peter, for that. Yeah, why are we running away from the term old? It's because of what is associated with oldness, and it's because over years we have actually, for lack of a better word, bastardized this name old, that it's something to run away. And you had our colleague saying that there are people who are forever 16. What are we running away from? There is something that then is associated with that particular age that you don't want to feel that. Yet we are saying, basically, that particular numbers we are saying, the ages, that does not speak much about one's ability or one's competence to do something. And even this morning, you're having that discussion. I was telling the class in the morning, and even then they sort of brought it up when they said that the old or the older generation bring what we refer to as stability and the history of a particular organization, and therefore they are able then to steer any particular organization to greater heights based on the history that then they carry with whenever they are in a particular job. And that is actually factual, in the sense that if you look at it objectively, the former head of public service, and they've been two. If you look at Mudhaura and the subsequent public service, those particular people were, for lack of a better word, they were the bureaucrats behind the bureaucracy that oils or drives the civil service. That even at the time when they were leaving, they kept on being called back to actually train the next generation because of the institutional memory that they carry with them. And therefore, to easily then dismiss that older generation, that as somebody said, that they are tired, they are being, and I like that they are being assisted, it's for their benefit. I think there's an age where you reach now that you'll be told now it's time now to slow down. I wouldn't want to be coming to the office and doing cases in court when I am 80. I should be focusing on other things that are less strenuous. Like I shouldn't be waking up at 5 fighting in traffic to be able to be in the office at 8 or something like that. There should be something more in life than simply waking up and doing all those things. So there are those particular phases that we actually go through. And even to go back to the first question, and actually today we just Google positive discrimination, a lot of definition will actually come up. So how do we then engage that there's nothing like positive discrimination? And positive discrimination actually has been defined as that particular act of giving advantage. The moment you say giving advantage, it means that there's somebody who is actually experiencing a disadvantage by virtue of that particular advantage. And the only justification for that particular advantage is we are saying that if we go back, this particular person has often been treated unfairly. And therefore, we are trying to do some kind of compensation or something like that, for lack of a better word, so that they are able then to catch up. And that's why we call it as positive discrimination. Of course, if you look at discrimination in itself, it's negative word. It's a negative word. But then when you say positive, is like those, it's a contradiction. So that it allows us then to explain what is positive about this particular discrimination that we are engaging in. And Peter has actually put it actually aptly. If you look at most of the leaders of the free world, I think Recently in Africa, we have produced the youngest president, and we are going then to judge that presidency based on past president and see, is it actually true that the older people retire with their oldness or with their age, and the younger people will provide a more youthful. And I remember that discussion one time when Michuki was appointed to the cabinet, and the former prime minister actually said, you rather have Michuki in cabinet, who is an older person with youthful ideas, than to have a youthful leader with very old ideas in the cabinet. And history has actually, our history in Kenya has actually proved that particular right by just going back to look at the performance of our cabinet secretary when they were given that opportunity. We can draw the parallel and decide whether actually age ages the ideas that you have, and the youthfulness in you will actually make the life around us any particular better. So if you look at so I want to move on to these 10 areas to see how this particular older people or aged people are treated. And of interest is we visited the Faculty of Law at Stetson University in Florida, and they have a whole department on ageism, where they simply just study ageism, they influence policy based on ageism, they sponsor legislation that will govern the older people. So it is a department where people actually study and get PhD in that particular area. And I found that to be a very interesting thematic area. So when it comes to gender, we actually told that in no society do women actually enjoy the same opportunity as men. That was based on the Human Development Report by the UNDP. And this quotation, we're told, is true of Africa as it is elsewhere in the world. And the impact of gender differences and inequalities in education, in employment, and other areas actually increases through every stage of the life of an African, hitting hardest when they actually become old. And apart from women not enjoying the same opportunities as men in education and other sectors, majority of actually, so apart from women not enjoying the same opportunities as men in education and other sectors, we're told in the majority of African countries, you find older women cannot get loans. They cannot get credit facility in some bank, nor can they buy houses through mortgage and housing institution. The reason being very simple, that in their younger age, they were not allowed to actually own this particular property. It was not registered in their name. They cannot actually charge this particular property as collateral for a particular loan because it is not registered in their name. And therefore, you find that older women in Africa, therefore, more likely than men to be poor, as it is not culturally acceptable for them to own property. And in addition, widows actually denied the right to inherit property they share with their husband. And this I find to be a very unfortunate scenario, in the sense that if you look at our Succession Act, many men will buy property and assets and they will be registered in your name and not jointly with your wife. And you'll always find that upon your demise, the law of succession, I think section 27 and 29, actually provides that your wife will have a life interest in the estate. A life interest meaning that she will continue to live in that particular house, to enjoy, to be provided for until the day she leaves this particular earth, which is good. The assumption there is that that estate will then be able to bring that enjoyment so that she's able to live comfortably the way she's been living until she passes on. It provides that the people who inherit that estate are the children. are the ones who will inherit the estate while she enjoys a life interest. Now, my question is then, in the event for some reasons she is ill and she's in need of some treatment and she wants to sell this particular house, remember, she cannot sell. She has to go to court and seek an order to allow her to sell this particular house, because the act of selling the house will disinherit these children. And therefore, you need to convince a judge seated somewhere of the urgency and the need to actually dispose of this property so as to get this particular old lady for treatment. Other than that, she cannot sell it on her own. Yet, the point is, these particular properties in reality, she supported her husband and she shared with her husband this particular asset for the better part of their life. But in the absence of her husband, then she becomes a guest in this particular space. And in other quarters, if she doesn't want to create way for the life interest to crystallize and for the inheritance to then attach the children, then she must be helped out to then allow the children then to enjoy the properties. And we know instances where children have actually gone out of their way to help out their mothers so that they can inherit this property, so that they're not held with this life interest thing. And that is why you find some have actually insisted in providing, in enjoining their spouses in the title document and providing in their will specifically how the property is then to devolve, where they bequeath their own wife property, so that in their demise, it actually becomes theirs with the ability to keep and actually sell those particular properties. And the older ones, we're told, are actually susceptible to all forms of abuse, including murder in bequest by relatives, including their own sons, to actually disinherit them of property and of them after their husbands have actually passed away. And in many cases, family resources, that is land and house and money, are actually allocated to the male relatives, often along the widow herself, especially if she's young. The older ones are usually abandoned by a society that sees no need for them. And older women who refuse to be inherited after their husband's death end up actually losing all their lifelong acquired matrimonial assets after being chased by the deceased husband relatives. And this actually impoverishes them even further. And we know of cases. You just need to go. Nowadays, Zoom has really helped. You just needed to go to Milimani, third floor, the family court, and see how older women actually come to court to fight for what was their husband's right. And they are fighting against either their children. In worst case scenario, we have seen them actually fighting against their own grandchildren, who are demanding what is their grandfather's or their father's interest in their grandfather's estate, and people want this particular property. It actually begs the question then, why do we invest so much in our children's education if then at some point that education will not help them? They'll come to fight what we have actually struggled so hard in life to make. And that's why some people actually say, do not invest in some of these things. Put money in a bank, and then when you're tired, pay this to a company. Travel the world with your wife. See the world. Enjoy. Provided you paid fees and you allow those children to study, that is their best inheritance. The rest, they should allow you to take this particular cruise ship and burn the money that you have actually worked for. Where death finds you, leave a will and say, I should be buried within 3 days. And that marks the end of all these things. In the event of emergencies, how has emergencies affected this particular older generation? And we are made to believe that Africa is actually known for its man-made and natural disasters. And between 1990 and today, there has been 57 armed conflicts, and this has even increased in the 45 locations around the world, and the killing an estimated about 3.6 million. The majority of these who have been killed have actually died in Africa. A disaster such as earthquakes, droughts, and other natural calamities heavily disrupt the existing survival patterns of any community group, but older people are always hardest hit. Today, even if we leave this class and we go to Mahimahi or those camps that are actually there, I can guarantee you the people you'll find in those classes, majority will be the older people because of these natural calamities. If it is post-election, you will find the people in the camps will be the older people. When it comes to drought, recently we were seeing in Kajiado drought, and the government was taking food to classrooms. And we saw older generation coming to eat with their grandchildren in school. So they always are the hardest hit. And regardless of which calamity hits a particular community, we are told older people are affected at the time of the occurrence of the disaster, at the point of rescue. When we are rescuing people, we say, these people are not going to add value to the nation building. Let's evacuate the able-bodied individual. When it comes to resettlement, we will focus again on other people, not the older people. When it comes to repatriation, again, we will not prioritize them, we prioritize other people. And their situation actually becomes worse than any other population group because of the discrimination they face. And in a program that was set up to support older refugees in Zimbabwe, it was actually found that the refugee camps, in those camps, older people were not provided with food and shelter, as did the other population group. Because of the shortage of shelter at one of the refugee camps, you find that priority will be given to the younger people and not to the older women who were forced then to live with other men in the same tent. When it comes to employment, and this is interesting, when it comes to employment, Article 2.3 of the UDHR actually states that everyone has a right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable condition of work, and to protection against unemployment, and to just and favorable remuneration. A very good provision, but it does not apply to the older people. The observation across Africa is that actually older people are never given a chance in terms of employment opportunity. And in many countries, you'll find, including Kenya, that it is rare for anyone to get employed in the public service at the age of 45 or above as a new entrant. You must have worked in other organizations. Therefore, you're coming with a lot of skills, expertise to then get a job maybe in public service. But that you've been tamarking for the last 44 years, and therefore this is the first job you want to get at 45, there is no one who will actually look at you as somebody who's employable. Because the assumption then is that you're tired, and somebody said you should be helped then to rest. Forgetting that actually, if you look at most American presidents, that was the age of getting into office. If you look at the age Kibaki got into office, actually almost double that particular age. Yet we can see the deliverables that he has as compared to those who came after him. If you look at any newspaper today and you look for the job advertisement, you realize how discriminatory those particular applications are. That you will find that the age set that they are looking for is always below the age of 40, and people grow fast. The other day we were we were eligible for all manner of scholarship, but then we chose not to apply them. Today, any scholarship that is actually sent in our portal, they say that you must have graduated in the last, I don't know, 5 years, and you must be below 35. Now, when I look at 35 and where I am 11 years ahead of that 35, then you wonder now, when will we actually get the scholarship? So they are actually saying we should now fund our education going forward. We are not in that bracket where other people's money should be used to then educators who want to ask if we did not, or you have not saved to now educate yourself at that particular age of 45. Many of these particular scholarship will not take you on scholarship. So age, you find again you are being discriminated at that particular point. Yet we were told life begins at 40. What is this 40 that life begins at, when now everyone wants us out of the equation? If you look at economic isolation, in most part of Africa, older people are the poorest, as they usually do not have a regular source of income. Most of them actually depend now on how they invested in their children and where they worked. Are they getting pension or not? That is what they actually depend on. If you look at the right to own property under Article 17 of the UDHR, is one set of rights which is massively violated. By way of example, if you look at Zimbabwe, they had that the land acquisition and the resettlement program which were taking place in Zimbabwe, South Africa, did not take into account the needs of the older people. In the resettlement program, which they were implementing around the 80s in Zimbabwe, those above 60 would not qualify for resettlement because they were looking for people who could till and make the land productive. And suddenly people just decided these 60-year-old do not have the capacity, the ability to actually supervise and ensure those lands are then productive. Okay. So older people resorted to using their children and the younger wives to actually qualify for these particular resettlement programs. And the story of a Kenyan woman who ended up staying on the street of Nairobi because her land had been grabbed by a local business person is a case in point, because somebody actually feels that you are not entitled to this particular land, because what are you doing with it? You need to give way to allow people to actually come and make good use of this particular property. An older man who actually lost his livestock as a result of tribal clashes in Kenya had this to say: when my case went to court, they continuously spoke in English and I could not understand the proceedings. In the end, I was told that my case was closed and I came empty-handed. So that even Article 47, just that particular respect by the court to see that we have a senior citizen who may not be able to understand a particular language, and therefore invite him to speak to what language they understand, but even that is not accorded to this particular older person. In fact, they're deemed to be a nuisance, even in the court corridors, and therefore the quicker we are able to close and determine this particular matter, the better for everyone, so that we focus on other things. In Accra, Ghana, an 80-year-old woman lost her house to a tenant who forged the title deeds. In a survey carried out in Kenya, older women reported cases of loss of property as a result of abuse, including false land deals, removal of the deceased property by landlords, and the pretense of rent arrears, and all this because people are claiming ownership of this property. We saw a case in Westlands where these old Asian ladies were simply being removed, and they have lived in those houses for as long as they can remember. But somebody else shows up and says that the house is theirs. When did they sell the house? they can't even remember. But we are quick to dispossess these older people because we feel that they can no longer defend themselves, and we can just take advantage of their age. And therefore, the age discrimination is very rife in institutions, actually, that even provide financial support to groups and individuals in Africa. I'm sure even those of us who are bankers, you find that there is a particular age that you cannot give somebody a loan. If you're working for the insurance, the policy is actually pegged on your age. And even those who will give you because of a certain age, they'll make the premiums very high, so that at the end of the day, a lot of people will not take it, or then you use the money that you have been using for upkeep to actually pay these particular premiums simply because of your age. And since the majority of them, the older people are employed in informal sector, you find that their ventures normally do not usually thrive, as no one will accord them any financial support. When it comes to social security and insurance, you'll also find that it has been, yes, was there a question?
Yes, there's a question.
Okay.
Apologies. Allow me to crave your indulgence.
That's fine.
There are the three last slides that you went through. One about inequality on women and age. I have two inputs. First of all, I'd like to disagree with the slides that you showed that actually women are still feeling unequal to men in terms of education, and the particular, if I could have been looking at the slides, the last three, I'd like to say that the women empowerment that was propelled, especially between the millennium, the 2000 to now, has put women in a greater heights than men right now. And I can tell you for free that there are many women who are even employed than men in relation to the number of the same number of men who are qualified. What am I saying is that if you take, for example, 10 men who are qualified and 8 women who are qualified for that particular job, 7 or 6 out of the 8 will be employed, but out of the 10, only 4 or 5 will be in the same job category. So what I'm saying is that there is no inequality to the date today of women unemployment because of their gender. That was killed. And there is no inequality of women being educated because of their gender. Actually, for a very long time, I don't know if it has been reviewed, but they still get into the university with the lesser entry points, you know. And this was set, which was good to bring them up to a certain level. But then now, when they are with us in the certain, when they're with men, let me say men, in that certain equal level, nobody has revisited it, so that this goes to the normalcy, such that now these two genders can continue living equally. But what I see is that in the next 5 or 10 years, if this is not revisited, then we will also have to put in another, what is called men equality, or something else will come to support the boy child, to uplift them again to the level, to the standard of women. Again, in the economical empowerment, I'd also challenge that if you look at even how many women drive cars on these our roads, I'm talking about 0 mileage cars. I'm not talking about second-hand cars. You will realize that more women own 0 mileage cars than men own. I'm not talking about second-hand cars. I'm talking about 0 mileage cars. So this shows something about equality of women on economical empowerment right now. You look at employers right now, the employers would employ women because they feel there's a little challenge from that point of gender than employing men, you know. You look at even our legal sector, how many male lawyers are there in respect to female lawyers, and how many female lawyers stay in the profession vis-a-vis how many male lawyers stay in the profession, you know. So all these, when I sum them up, I find it disturbing to agree with the last three slides that you've shown us, because maybe these notes were for the years before, but I really don't think these notes still apply to us to date. I still know that some sectors, especially of age, especially in education, they'd rather employ people who finished, who got TSC numbers for previous years and stall the ones for this year or 2-3 years back as they continue doing that. So that is all I wanted to input for the class today. Thank you. This is Washington.
Thank you, Washington. Okay. Somebody had asked you for evidence, but then let me not focus on that. And it's very easy. Yes.
Could I please just make a small comment from what colleague?
Please do.
Yeah, first of all, I really am always at a loss why every time we're having a conversation about equality and equity, our our male counterparts want to make it look like a competition, because yes, we accept that there has been a lot of progress in terms of women empowerment, but it is a reality. It is actually factual. You cannot argue with facts that there's still a lot to be done to remedy the many years of historical injustices against women. But also, there's always this assumption that because you are exposed to the urban setting where there's like a lot of women empowerment and, all these girls going to school left, right, and center, but we forget that we are talking about the whole, the whole masses of people women who are living in the rural areas, women who are living in underdeveloped countries where they still really face, you'd go to these countries or to these rural areas and you'd think that you're living in 1920s. So I always feel really triggered when I hear these conversations of, in a few years we'll now have to catch up with programs of boy-child empowerment. It has never been a competition about, against men and women. But the fact is, we still have a long way to go when it comes to women empowerment. Asante.
I couldn't agree with you more. There was another hand. Okay. So that was a good response. And Washington, the speaker, there are two participants who have raised their hands. So please unmute and put your points across. I'm unable to see the name, so just proceed and speak.
Good evening.
Evening to you.
Am I audible?
Very.
Okay, so I'd like to respond to, I believe, Mr. Washington's remarks. And I have a couple of things that I'd love to talk about. So first, he talks about women being over-empowered. And I don't know what kind of world he lives in, because I think that we'll be living in utopia, actually. Because if even at right now, when we look at the Law of Succession Act, there's also that principle of disinheriting women, where if the widow remarries, the interest that she has on the property, it stops there. So such that if the woman gets married again, she can't benefit from anything from that estate that the husband left. And actually, the reality is that women still live on men's provisions. Very many women, we look at our mothers and our grandmothers, and even our grandmothers, most of them were not learned. They were all depending on the grandfather. You hear the grandfather, I don't know, is in Kisumu, but then the mom was always there because the father was the provider. So the role of the man was to provide, and the role of the woman was to nurture and to take care of the home. So when you talk about affirmative action programs, such that, for example, the things that you talk about, he says he talks about the lower entry points that favor women. I mean, these policies actually came to remedy that because women are not in the same level. He talks about zero mileage cars, but then we can't look at a small subset of women who are living in the urban area who are maybe children of former high politicians and say that all women are living like that. No, women are actually suffering right now. The women and girls who are being subjected to FGM. If we're talking about empowered women, why are we still having girls who are being subjected to FGM, who are being raped? And there are very many children who are facing teenage pregnancies. They can't even go back to school. And then there are ministers saying, no, we can't accept these children back in school. So what kind of empowerment is he really talking about? Because I really don't understand. He's saying that we can look that right now a woman is more likely to be employed. A case in point will be the president right now. He said that if when he gets to government, he'll make sure that his cabinet will be gender equal, something of the sort, such that men will be 50% and men will be 50%. Men 50%, women 50%. But then up to now, he's not even met the two. No, I think he has. No, I'm not really sure if he's met the two-thirds gender quota. But then both the National Assembly and the Senate have still not met the two-thirds gender quota. So if women are really over-empowered and are way above and all that, why are we still having these gaps? Why are we still not seeing women in the cabinet, in high profile, I mean, women are not empowered, and I just think Washington is living in utopia at this point. Yes.
Okay. The other three hands that are up, please go.
Hey, I've had to jump in because good evening, Mwalimu.
Good evening.
Yes, this is Ochieng. I'm actually on the road, so I'm not able to really take good command of my gadget and driving at the same time. But I have to come to the defense of my brother Washington at the same time because you know, all these people are right. Washington is right. The ladies are also right. And if you can feel like the kind of agitation from our learned sisters, you can feel that even as they say that there shouldn't be a competition between these, they are approaching it like it is a competition, and that is the reality. So Washington is right in this aspect. The answer lies in, I think, Dr. Moza called it intersectionality, something like that. That women, even though they need to be empowered, it should not be a blanket kind of empowerment because a girl in Nairobi, like if I have a daughter and a son, they grow under the same conditions. Like when they are watching TV, they are all watching it. When they are doing the assignments, when I'm hiring a tutor for extra classes, so they will have that same kind of equality. Now, why should the two of them, now when they get to the employment level, now one should be favored over the other? So I think there should just be a way of looking at it that there should be say policies of measures specifically for women in places like Kajiado that are disadvantaged one way or the other. But it should not be that when we get, because my sisters in this class, some of them are very brilliant. Not some, actually all, if not most. So there is nothing in them that is less than the male counterparts. They are equal to the task. They will be brilliant lawyers. They should not have that upper hand because they are equal to the men here, if not more equal. So I think that is the point. We should just say that a girl child in certain parts of Kenya will face certain kinds of inequality that maybe a girl in Kisumu or Mombasa is not exposed to, and have policies that can specifically address that. But the moment they get to an equal field, then let all of them be treated just equal. Yeah. In defense of my brother Washington again, thank you.
Okay. Was there another hand? Okay. Now, just listening to those contestations and about the role men and women play in society is important. And I wouldn't want to jump into the fray, but simply say that if you look at those arguments, assuming that it is right that women have all these particular advantages, I want us to go back and look at those particular women in their olden age, and then look at how society will then treat the same woman who in your mind was very empowered in town here. You will actually realize in what we call our community land, you'll find there are very few women who can access that particular land. Once some elders sit at a particular tree, they will then define how that land will then devolve and to whom will then benefit that land, irrespective of your level of education. And therefore, you see some people simply getting that land because they are the male members of the family. Therefore, they'll get that particular land. So what we are looking at here is those particular sunset days at 60 thereafter. If you put a scale and look at how men and women experience these things at 60, you will find that the lived experience is very different. And I like one of the contributors who mentioned that you don't be confused by the few women you see in urban areas. You just need to take a tour. You need to take a tour around this particular country and see women in rural setting. Even do a statistics of the people who died in Shakahola. Is it by strange coincidence that more women died in Shakahola than men? What is the reason behind that? If indeed we are saying we've attained that particular level of equality, go to Mahimai here, just do your statistics and see how many people are victims. How do men and women experience that particular life in Mahimayo, in those camps? Are those lived experience the same? If you look at the age level of those particular people, are they experiencing the same kind of disadvantage based on that similar catastrophe? And that is what we are actually trying to put across when we look at discrimination on the basis of age. And I think he's the last speaker who brought in the issue of the intersectionality, how one gender experience discrimination may actually be more as compared to the other, because you find one, you are discriminated as a woman at that age. So you have two discrimination, one as a female and one again by virtue of age. Now you'll even realize that women who even acquire properties towards their sunset days, as soon as even they pass on, there is a way they may actually have left a particular child, but then they'll be told that this particular child is of questionable background and therefore is not entitled. And you're not entitled because of what? Because you're a child of a woman. Yet in reality, there's no child of a woman. I don't think women conceive on their own. But then we use those particular lines to then disenfranchise certain offspring, certain children of certain members of the society. I saw another hand. Let me not cut you out.
Mwalimu, my name is Caroline Mugadi. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you very well, Caroline.
Sorry, I'm having challenges with my network. I'm actually sitting outside. So I've listened keenly to when you talked about leadership and how people thought that, people comment, and when they see a person of advanced age being appointed to a role, they think that person is tired and should retire and is not useful. And I think that sometimes there's a blurred line between leadership and management, because leaders, they cast a vision, and they probably have also experience or exposure that the others don't have. And some leaders don't necessarily even have to have, say, been very active in every area that they are leading. But what they bring to the table is the ability to cast a vision that others buy into it, and they're able to perform at their optimum level. On the issue of girls and women, I listened keenly to one of my classmates who thinks that, or who shared that girls are being favored over boys by being given lower entry. And I think what people fail to see is probably the historical development of why certain policies have been put in place to support the girl child in various things. I come from a family where a member of the family had to drop out of school for the follower, who was a boy, to proceed and go to university, and he eventually became a professor and so forth. But this lady who dropped out is not accorded any compensation, because she was equally smart and could possibly also have achieved the same. But in an environment where the family had meager resources, historically our African customs have favored the boy over the girl, and the boys would advance, and the girls, because they would be married off, were seen as the lesser one to receive investment in their education. In my mother tongue, we have a saying that says, the one who didn't see their mother young, he thinks that his father threw away the cows. And if we don't really appreciate historically where things are coming from, and try to really retrospect and see where did some of these decisions come from, we can easily throw away the baby and the bathwater by saying that, oh, girls are being favored. Mwalimu, I had an opportunity to visit the World Bank, Washington, D.C., sometime in 2019. And I raised this question because we were looking at, the impact that has been achieved globally in terms of, equipping the girl child and women-led families. And I said, what's going on with the boy child? Is it true that the narrative that we are seeing, where we say that we have focused so much on the girl to the expense of the boy, but the World Bank, and I want to believe that they take, they do research and they have the statistics and the numbers, they said that the woman is still far behind, that the situation, the culture, the norms still largely favor the boy. And we are still really living in a man's world. So I think that it would be good to also share some data and statistics and numbers and historical underpinnings that would help people understand why are we where we are today. Is the empowerment of the girl child equals to the falling back of the boy child we see? I don't think so. When you look at the cultural setup that we used to have, where the man was kusema na kutenda, and everything revolved around the man. I've worked in the banking sector for a long time. Women could not borrow because they didn't. In the past, when lending was based on collateral, meaning that you brought your security to the bank and then you are able to access credit, women could not access that. And we all know what credit properly used can do. Most of the people who've built themselves and built huge companies did not do it on their own money. They did it on borrowed money. And that borrowed money is in form of loans and all the supportive products that go along with that. And I just want to appeal and I'm sorry that I'm one of those now speaking with the voice of the gender that I am. I am a female, she, her, woman. And I'm speaking like I'm supporting the voice of the woman, but I truly have a spot in my heart for the boy child.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline. And Washington, this is a lived experience. I know you mentioned that maybe the notes we are covering is for that generation then, but Caroline has actually put it in context about the practice that was happening in the bank. And I'll give you another practical example. I have 4 daughters, and recently when my dad had passed on in 2020, and there was some small land around our home there, which actually is so small that you can only put up one house. And some wazes in the village, some of them actually being retired teachers, did give me a call, and they told me there is some land here we want you to buy. And I went, checked it out. Well, it didn't impress me, but then they told me because there's an old lady here who lost the children through AIDS, and now is looking after the grandchildren, requires fees because the granddaughter has been admitted to Chuka University. And on the basis of that reason, I said, okay, fine, we'll purchase it. But then much later, I came to realize why. Interestingly, I have 4 girls, and I come from a family of 5 boys. And I was wondering how come among my siblings, I was the only one singled out to buy that land. And I came to realize later that according to those wise old men, was that I have girls. And therefore, I do not require space to build for them houses because they are girls. They'll be married off. If I had boys, they will not be given that particular option because then I will require that particular space. And I just said, I wish I was privy to that information earlier where I was selected, and I told them, now, in fact, there's nothing I will do in that particular land. I actually bought a bigger land, and I told them, those girls that you are seeing, they are going to be married off. I'll build for them in the same space that I will be in. So you can actually see that even despite that particular period, despite time, as we say, society has actually changed, women have been, there are still practices and lenses that will want to put this particular girl child down. And it's a clear picture that in my absence, you can see how those girls will then be treated, because they'll be told, no. You cannot then be married and bring those people here. So there'll be a lot of no's, the don'ts, which will actually cloud their path, so that you have to be very clear as you are alive how you make this particular provision for these particular girls. Yet it is not true that you actually have to make those provisions for your sons, because the community, the system itself works to their advantage. They will be called from wherever. And in my community, even if the entire family perishes and there's one boy somewhere, you will be told that home you can't touch it because there is a boy. And that boy will come someday. He doesn't need to go to court. He doesn't need to kill people. He just needs to show up, and the community will show him that is the land of your forefathers, and that is where you are supposed to build. And this is despite the level of education. So we still have those particular practices, which for now, it will not affect us now, but in our old age. And I want us to focus this discussion on the old age, how the system treats older people. Of course, whether you are a man, whether you are a female, the system as it is, there are no laws, there are no policy framework to ensure that you have a comfortable life at that point in time. The system is skewed in the sense that you will find it very hard then to operate, unless now we start that advocacy now to create that safe space for people then who old. Look at the policy that we have on giving the old people money. We've come up with a very good policy for the youth where they can apply for government tenders. But for the old people, we give them 3,000 a month, which is given after every 3 months. So we give you what? Is it 3 months? So you get 9,000 or something. And now that 9,000, what is it? And you see that particular age is a time where you are sick or something. In other countries at that particular level, we give you social security, you go to hospital, there is no treatment. But now this 9,000 is everything. You need to eat, get treated, and survive on this particular money. And at that particular time, there's no distinction. We give all the same. So we draw the line and everyone gets 3,000. How is that 3,000 going to help people at that particular level? Of course, the lived experience of women who are older is very different from the lived experience of men who are older in that particular camp in Mahimahio. If you look at Social Security, we are told that it has been established that a majority, that in the majority of the countries worldwide, particularly in the developing countries, older people are typically the poorest members of society and they far below the poverty line. And they usually do not have regular source of income. Neither do they enjoy any social security provision. If you find like in a country like Kenya here, most of them survive on NHIF, and the NHIF, if their children are paying for the monthly subscription. If that is not available, then there is no cover for that particular group of people. They are the poorest in every country. The poverty rates in older people household are 29% higher than in any other household. They are part of the 100 million in developing countries that live on less than $1 per day. You have 80% of them who have no regular income. They are struggling to cope in failing and struggling healthcare and social provision system. And this is a story you will find in Kenya, in Tanzania. I went to Tanzania to take a friend to pay dowry. And you may think that we're in the 21st century, but then women are not supposed to sit at the same level with men. So if you're still on the seat, women are supposed to be a step lower. So they sit in those small stools so that you are not at the same level. Yet we are still saying we have now done a lot of affirmative action. Now we are at par. There's still a long way to actually go in trying to address some of the inequalities that we see out here. And more so, today we are only making a case for the aged members of our society. And by far the biggest problem for older people with respect to pension is the absence of the universal pension for older people. Like in sub-Saharan Africa, countries like all South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Lesotho, and Mauritius actually pay a universal pension of varying amounts to their older citizens. In other countries, it actually does not exist. If you never worked in the civil service, in the public space, there's nothing coming. You are not anywhere to be recognized. You have to depend on alms and other support that your children will give you if you invested in them. If you did not, then clearly there is nothing for you. And that is why Justice Mrima in the High Court recently made it mandatory that children have an obligation to take care of their elderly and aging parents. Was that judgment really necessary? If these are parents who brought us to the space we are in, must we get a judgment that can then be enforced when we find that you have neglected your aging parent, that somebody will take you to court and cite that precedent to compel you to actually support them? But then we are who we are, and there is that particular decision that we have then to deal with and be reminded of our obligation. If you look at the right to health, which is a universal right, it is far the biggest problem for older people actually face because of the cost and access to the health services. And anytime they go to the hospital, even if they have genuine complaint, I'm actually feeling malarious, I'm tired of something, you will always be reminded that I think this ni ugonjwa ya uzee to ni uzee. So no one wants to look at you and treat you. They want to look at your age and actually come to the conclusion that it is age that is ailing you and not the fact that you are just sick. So by and large, the attitude of the health personnel is actually also so negative that older people actually prefer to die rather than go to the nearest clinic. And this range from denial of medication, they are being rebuked. Some are even slapped in hospital. They are put in isolation, in abandonment. They are neglected. Some of them, even their linen is not being changed because people they think these are just old people who are buying so much time here, and they ought to have actually signed out a long time ago. So you find they are abandoned. The attitude of the healthcare workers towards them is wanting. If you look at the structure in the hospital, how they're supposed to access medicine, you're supposed to go to this door, pay there, come back. And these are senior citizens. They may not have the time to do all that particular rounds, yet that is where they're supposed to get medication from. So by virtue of that, you find that most of them opt just to sit at home and do nothing and wait for their death in pain. And research findings have actually consistently found cases where old people are told that their illness were not the ones they presented, but old age, and that they are wasting drugs for the younger people. And in many cases, these older people just go back to their homes and die because of this particular sickness. Of interest is HIV and AIDS, and you're told HIV and AIDS has and will continue to have a huge impact on older people. Like any other population, they might get infected with HIV. But what is our attitude? Our attitude is that there is a certain age you reach, and I think we make that assumption that you are not supposed to engage in sex. And therefore, if you look at even the sex education and the dissemination of information out there, it does not target the older people. It's as if they're immune and they are past the sexual stage, and therefore they are beyond HIV and AIDS. And therefore, when they get infected, their reaction has always been, and what were you doing at your age? At what? At your age, meaning that there's an age you are meant to stop. The sexual needs of older people are never considered seriously, since many people actually believe that older people have no sexual desires and should not engage in sexual activities. And that is why you find, as a matter of fact, they have those needs. The education campaigns do not target them. They should target them. They should be given information as opposed to focusing on their grandchildren under their care. You should also focus on them. And they are constructed and disseminated in inaccessible media and language. So if you look at even the radio, when you disseminate messages about AIDS, chukua control for an older person, what are these control that you are talking about? The language itself is appealable to the younger generation. To these particular people, who they will sit there, but they will not even understand the message that is actually being communicated. On point number 8 is the fact that in our legislation themselves, and some of the members actually contributed to that by saying, if you look at our legislation, what our legislation actually provides, it actually is a starting point where this particular older people then are phased out. Now, if you look at our retirement laws, initially it was 55, now it was 60. Now we have a pool of people here who can't get into the public service. We are thinking of then reducing it back to 55 so that then we exit a number of people so that the younger people can then come in. It's a good thing. But then again, how we frame our laws may be also the reason why we have this particular discrimination. And in some research that was carried out in some South African countries, Uganda and Kenya, they actually reported that there was an increasing number of crimes which are perpetrated against older people, which was highlighted. And this ranged from assault, theft, robbery, rape, and murder. People, for one reason or the other, will kill these particular people. And the majority of perpetrators actually are never brought to book, since the law enforcement agency are always reluctant to actually take this matter serious. In fact, in some instances, these law enforcement agencies have actually even reported when a particular old lady reports that she's been raped. The argument has always been, why would a young man be interested in raping such an older woman? So it's something they frown about, and no action then is taken. And this overall lack of protection from the law enforcement bodies actually increases the vulnerability of older people and exposes them to abuse and exploitation. If you look at some countries in the western part of the world, that is why people take their older parents to those homes or shelters for the older people, which in Africa we really frown about because of this notion we were told of Ubuntu. We are because I am, because you are because I am, and therefore we need to stay together, we need to take care of our older people. It's a very good narrative, but remember, it is actually changing, so that we frown a lot when we hear people taking their parents to those particular homes. But what is the difference? When you pluck your older parents from the village and you bring them to stay with you in Nairobi, you leave the house at 6:30 when they are asleep, and you come back at 9 when they are asleep. You hardly talk to them. They're in some kind of a quiet prison, which is comfortable in your house. So they're just there seated quietly or something. Yet at this particular age, maybe those particular homes would have been a better place, where maybe even if they don't sleep there, where you drop them during the day, so they are able to catch up with their peers, talk, get something meaningful in life during the day, then come back home. Because when you leave them alone, abandoned in the house, how is that not abandonment? Which then we frown about when we say the whites abandon their parents in those particular homes. Maybe there is more quality of life in those particular homes because they are caregivers, they are doctors, and more so, they are human beings who they interact with and can actually talk to and socialize with, as opposed to being locked in a particular house away from their homes. Again, you know, the problem of older people, when you want to uproot them from their comfort zone, they will come to Nairobi for 2 days, and the next day they'll be telling you, who is feeding my chicken? My cat will die. I don't know, my vegetable garden will do what. So they want to be in that particular space. So it has actually presented a very difficult situation of how to balance these competing rights of taking care of the old vis-a-vis abandoning them or creating another environment where they are not then comfortable with. And again, we have to accept the fact that the world has changed. Not all of us are working from the village so that you can always be around the older generation. You have to be in town. The children have to be in town. They have to be taken care of in town, and oftenly you have to also pay attention to those who are in the village. And we've had a very unfortunate situation in Kenya. Remember the lady in Thika, who, despite the fact that he has, I think the daughter is abroad or the son, one of the child is abroad, one is in Nairobi here, and we are all, our ways of showing comfort and support is through M-Pesa. So they kept on sending the money to her. No one calls to find out whether she has received the money actually, and actually she has the ability to actually even go and buy food, and apparently they were sending to a corpse. The lady had died for quite some time in the house. No one actually knew that she had actually passed on. Is that how we want to treat the older people? Is that not neglect, where we define our relationship with them by sending money? If you look at our policies, they also do not help. it is almost without doubt that the plight of the older people in Africa is actually directly linked to the absence of policy and legislation which are aimed at protecting their interest. Only a handful of countries in sub-Saharan Africa have actually developed policy on aging, with very few others in the process of doing so. And therefore, this absence of legislation addressing strategic interests of older people in the majority of African countries has actually led to the violation of the rights of those people who are older. It has actually been argued here that this general lack of policy and legislation on older people is indicative of actually entrenched institutional age discrimination. And you'll find in other countries, they have actually made progress, that even they have gone to the extent of designing the road to take into account older people. They have put mechanism in hospital where if you are an old person, you are able to be attended to without a lot of actually movement, or even they have doctors that coming back to you because then you treasure the rights of this particular generation of people. When it comes to social abuse, as I conclude, we are told that there's a study that was carried out in Kenya that showed 60% of older women are facing abuses at the hands of their daughters-in-law, who are preventing them from getting regular food, warm clothes, medical attention, adequate shelter. An example was actually given of an older woman who was sharing a room with 2 goats where there was adequate shelter in the compound. And stories of older people being denied their basic right and being mistreated, in most cases by close relatives, is rife across the continent, Kenya not being spared. So we have all those particular stories. And the list of abuses against older person being accused of being witches, this we read in the papers all the day. It's always on Citizen. This older couple have been tortured to death. Their house has been burned because it is suspected. There's always one suspicion or the other that will be tied to a particular older person, and the person then is tortured to death, or their house is demolished so that they move away from that particular community because it is assumed that they bring curses to that particular community. There are statistics about these atrocities that face older people in Tanzania. There are 94 women who were killed due to witchcraft. February 99, there are 50-year-old men who went missing after a red village burnt his home. So there are all these examples which I will upload and then be able then to see all those examples. So what is then being done to address this issue of discrimination? The continent has actually seen a steady increase of the organization and efforts which are aimed at addressing older people. There's the Plan of Action on Aging, which was developed at the First Assembly of Aging in Vienna. In 1982, over 15 countries from sub-Saharan Africa converged here in Kenya to discuss aging issues, and the first time such a meeting was taking place. Help Age Kenya, an organization championing issues of aging in Kenya, was also established the same year. And in 1986, there was a workshop which aimed at addressing various issues facing older people. Help Age Zimbabwe, a national organization of older persons, was also established in 1988. So you can see across Africa, there is an attempt to set up bodies that will simply focus on addressing those who are old by providing mechanisms that will prevent them from being treated in a manner that dehumanizes them, or that indignifies their life. So all efforts are being done to address this particular issue. HelpAge International also was set up with a threefold mandate to advocate for the issue of the older people by creating as much awareness about these issues as much as possible. They also develop and implement direct programs that support older people and those that depend on them. And also they collaborate with other organizations, including those focusing on human rights to protect the rights of the older people. And therefore, in conclusion, it is important for us to reiterate the fact that age discrimination is rife in Kenya and in Africa. The abuse is both institutionalized as well as endemic among society in the continent, and also the fact that older people actually suffer abuse in many material aspects of their lives and have to struggle with little support from institutions that should actually be providing protection to them. It is also worth noting that recognition of the issues facing older people and the discrimination they experience is actually slowly coming to the table of most organizations and government. And that is why in the last, I think it is the Uhuru government that came with Money Policy, which was not there before. So this discussion has actually begun, and it can only be encouraged so that we are able to provide safe spaces for our older generation. As they fade away, they can then fade away in dignity and not fade away in situations that are not dignified. They're still human and they're entitled to all the rights as contained in both our Bill of Rights and in our other treaties, conventions that we are a party to, that provides for human dignity and equality of rights to all human beings. So a lot still needs to be done to combat this particular problem, but a journey of many miles always starts with a single step. It will help if we sensitize our people and we have policies and legislation that actually anchors these particular rights into law, so that then we are also able to go to court and complain whenever we see these instances of neglect. And the same way we went to court before Justice Mrima to have that particular issue addressed, so as to create this obligation which many of us thought is automatic, but then others have to be compelled to then take care of their older generation. I'll take any 2 or 3 questions on that. I am actually very late for a certain meeting, but I can take a few questions. Dr. Stella.
Mwalimu, mine is more of a comment, and it comes from more of a policy legal framework around social protection as regards to elderly people. And you've really elucidated around how it is that we can unpack, either if you're looking at Article 27 of the Constitution around discrimination based on age, or any other policy frameworks that exist. The only thing around what I find in terms of disconnection, and I speak as somebody from the health side, what I find a disconnection is right now we are leveraging so much on the demographic dividends that you're forgetting the part of the reason why we are having the huge demographic dividend that we want to harvest is because of the aging population, and we also need to actually leverage on that in terms of intergenerational conversations and experiences. I don't know how we can shift that. This is a comment or a question. I don't know how we could shift that conversation so that it's not just the young ones that we're investing in terms of keeping them healthy, but also the older ones who also, if you look at our health systems, the bulk of the chronic diseases, they actually form the hugest portion in terms of black tax for the young people generations in terms of chronic illnesses. I don't know where do you think that lever should shift so that we start being very intentional around protection of the older people, social protection?
Thank you, Dr. And I can't agree with you more. There needs to be a way where we will shift this conversation to the older generation. But unfortunately, if we look at the trends that we have right now, it will take a lot of efforts, both from government individually, to then have this particular discussion, because there is a huge population of young people that have come, and they're demanding for a lot, and each government then is concerned about winning the next election, and therefore you want to address this particular constituency, and therefore you will find this other discussion may not be a priority for now. It will require the steps the University of Stanford University has actually put in place to actually even now bring it to the level of the university, where we have departments that their role is simply advocacy, having more NGO and not only health NGOs who are actually going out there to sensitize the community on this particular issue of the older generation. And I heard the president actually saying that yesterday when he talked about children, and he said there is no older person who will be left to stay in this kind of an environment. So if you have the president speaking more to this particular issue, at some point maybe people will then be more interested in hearing more about what is this about the older people. The assumption that the older people have worked, and therefore they are quietly living a peaceful life in money, and they have all the medical care and attention. Remember, many times, if out of sight, out of mind, if you don't see them, you don't know that they do exist. And we teach that in the disability right class, where we mentioned that the moment you don't see people with disability, you may think that everyone actually is able-bodied, and therefore you don't need to make provisions for them. But then we keep them behind doors so no one sees them, and therefore we're unable to register. The more we keep the older people away from the table where decisions are then made, the more we will not have legislations and policies that actually favor the older people. And therefore, I'm at a loss actually as to how this discussion can actually be shifted. And you make a point, if you look at the medical expenses and the investment that we make in our healthcare sector, if you're unable to take care of the older generation, then we are going to spend a lot of money actually taking care of them at the expense of these younger ones. Yet, if we simply do the right thing, I think we're able to get a balance between the two competing needs. But then again, as I said, I don't know how that will be resolved in time or in the future. Bosco? Mm. Mm.
Yeah, I'm not together.
Yeah, you're right, Bosco. All these things are intertwined, and therefore, I don't think the idea is to totally solve all issues relating to ageism. The issue will be how do we come up with policy, legislation, and a change of attitude that will then create an environment where the older people can then be allowed to fade away in dignity. And I think if we are just able to create that particular environment, I think we will have done our contribution towards that particular generation. You cannot eliminate everything. And you're right in saying, and that's why I said, if at the point now that you're able, if you do not really invest in that particular old age, then you'll be treated very differently at that particular age. As you point out, Bill Gates will be treated different because his money will then be able to make him actually retire in grace, because then you are able to ensure all this social support around you actually works to your comfort. Who and to you if you don't have that kind of a resource? But we need that resource to ensure that. I think we just need a change of attitude and a little humanity in our processes. Then we should then be able to ensure that our older generation actually fade away in dignity. Somebody actually said that taking care of the old is a moral issue and not a legal issue. But remember, morality varies from one person to the other. If you see the court coming in to pronounce itself in something that is actually, according to us, purely a moral issue, it means that clearly it's no longer a moral issue, that now we need some kind of sanction, that if you do not then comply, there must be certain consequence. Caroline Mugadi.
Thank you, Mwalimu. I hope my Wi-Fi won't let me down. A very quick one with regards to solutions. In Mexico, there was someone who had tried to be president for long and wasn't making it. And he floated the idea that he was going to offer a non-contributory pension to the aged people. It sounded, like, how can that happen? But then what happens is that in Mexico, people really love their old people. They love family. They have strong family bonds. And it resonated very strongly with the population. So when he was actually able to become the president, he implemented this social intervention of a non-contributory pension to the aged people. And they used data that had been collected in previous social schemes that had been run by the government before, the telco and many other organizations that were involved in offering health intervention, food intervention, because they also discovered that a lot of the families in Mexico were led, sort of headed by these aged people. Over the years, because the opposition was also very interested in making sure that the people from the region are not being left out, it actually became a government stroke opposition project. It's matured into an institutional framework and institutions that have successfully run one of the best social interventions for older people in that South American area. So just thinking that such an intervention, maybe if we took it seriously, not that, oh, it is Kenya Kwanza, or it was Jaba, or it was whose government, and we just think seriously about these older people and have a spot for them in our hearts, so that we can implement it at the ground level. So a lot of families have eventually benefited from having their older people taken care of, living longer, living better lives. And that's what I wanted to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, there are experiences from elsewhere that can actually be borrowed. It takes an individual, and as we said, there's just an individual who came up with that idea and implemented it, and it works. And you mentioned something very important, that Mexico people love family. People love their old people. What happened to the Ubuntu that used to happen in Africa, that we were family oriented? And remember when I started by saying, the institution of the family now is breaking away. And if we can't get it right from that level, a lot of other social fabrics then will then collapse. Maybe that somebody needs to do that particular study. Njoki.
Also just a quick one. As I was thinking about it, and I was just thinking about the political economic system, because we live in a very in a capitalistic system that thrives on productivity. And so the idea would be that it is the younger generation that is productive. So a lot of the investment would then go towards, would make sense to invest in the youth or in the younger generation, because then that would result would be equal to profit. So maybe on a light note, labda usocialisti ndio jawabu. Asante.
Tashukuru, tashukuru. Caroline, your hand is still up, or is it old hand? Okay. I'll assume it was the old hand. So let the discussion continue on this ageism. We may not have all the answers. Ours is to create that awareness, and then we start looking for a solution, and then we talk to our policy makers and advocate for this particular change in policy. As Professor Sihanya one time said, we are not interested in disability because we are not disabled. Until one time you are in that particular car, or you just miss a step when going down the stairs, then you realize the importance of the disability movement. At least for disability, you can pray and it may not crystallize on you, but for age, we know we are all going there. It's simply like death, that we know we will die at some point. With age, we know at some point God will give us the 70 plus, and then the bonus, we will be old people in this country. How will we want to be treated? Will we want better treatment than what old people then experience now? If the answer is that we will want a better treatment, then what are we doing now to make the life of the older people more comfortable, so that by the time we are there, then things will have been sorted out? And that will be my parting shot. So allow me to stop there for now and join Rotary meetings somewhere else. Thank you and have a good evening.